This is TTAC. If I miss anybody, or if you're joining while I'm going through the roll call, just let me know. I run through it by community. So Amherst, we have Natasha Kipfer. I do not see anybody from Brookline. Hollis, Joan Cudworth. I don't see anybody from Hudson, nor Litchfield, nor Lineborough, nor Mason, Merrimack. Don Tomala is here. Nobody from Milford or Mount Vernon. Nashville, we have Julie Chismus, Peter Halmy, Pelham, Jeff Gowan, and Jen Beauregard. Nobody from Wilton. NTS, Camille Pattison. I don't see anybody from DOT. DES, Tim White is here. Federal Highway, Lee Levine. Nobody from FTA. And a bunch of us from NRPC. So, did I miss anybody? I guess not.
Greg, Matt Sullivan is here from Nashua as well.
Thanks, Julie, for the cover.
Greg, Carl Epix here from Southern New Hampshire planning.
Okay, we do have some guests here. Just running through the official, but good to know you're here, Carl. Okay, so we'll take up the minutes of our October 14th meeting. Did we have any errors or omissions? Problems we need to correct? Speak now. Otherwise, I will entertain a motion to approve. I can't hear you. Okay. And second?
Second.
And is there anybody who would not vote to approve or must abstain? Okay, so I'll declare the minutes to be approved. So we'll move on to our first item.
Greg.
Yes.
Somebody else joined by phone. I'm not sure who that was.
Okay.
Wayne Husband.
Wayne Husband. All right.
Okay, well, we've got you here.
Matt Sullivan's here from Nashua as well.
Yeah, we did get him. Okay, so our Public Transportation Agency Safety Performance Target was an attachment. Now, this actually is not something that absolutely has to be passed today. There was an extension on this originally. The targets for a safety plan to be submitted by NTS was advanced from January 20th or July 20th to December 30th. And we have then 6 months to establish our performance targets, but we had been given the data by NTS, and so we went ahead and calculated the rates, which I believe does satisfy what needs to be done for the submission. But Camille, I understand that there's been some discussions with FTA regarding the categories.
Yeah, so they had the opportunity for you to submit your draft plan, and they would turn it around, and you could, get feedback and then make those changes before you have an official adopted plan, which makes sense. We took advantage of that. I submitted it right before Halloween and got the results last week. And they do have the kind of a rubric with, tangible changes that we need to make. But one of them was actually to the safety performance target. So they said you had to have 7 targets. Although when I looked at the comment, it only provided input on 6 targets, and we don't have all of them. And they wanted us to represent it a little bit differently, but it was more like what you're doing, like with system reliability. We had days between incidents because that's actually how the guidance was originally written. And then they wanted it like by vehicle revenue miles. So my suggestion was you could go ahead and adopt these, and then I have to go down and sit through it and figure out how we're going to change it. What those changes are when they're done, I could send them to you, and this board could vote on them again. I mean, we could do it that way.
Right. I mean, this is just a recommendation to the MPO to endorse, and if they aren't finalized, we would not have the MPO take that up in December. There's no need to, because the deadline has been shifted here. So, I just I just set up this performance target table based on the FTA, you know, with what they had put into their guidance. So we have fatalities, injuries, safety events, and system reliability. Those are the 4 basic categories. And then we have the totals, and then we did the rates. You provided the totals for each category. We just took your vehicle revenue, mileage, and calculated rates. So that actually gives us 8. Or are they saying that these 4 categories need to be expanded?
Yeah, and I just glanced at it honestly. So all I know is I need to make changes to it. But part of it was they wanted it by like how you did vehicle revenue mile, and you've done it that way. So you might have actually saved me some time. So, I mean, I think it's up to you. You could go ahead and do it or just wait. And I don't know how significant the changes are going to be. I just know that they provided comments on that section, and I haven't had time to go back and revise it yet.
Okay, well, I guess, you know, again, this is advisory, so it doesn't hurt, you know, to solicit any comment from people, and we could vote just, you know, if this is, you know, an acceptable approach, and we'll certainly come back and revise it if that's required. Otherwise, you know, if we have your recommendation, then if there's no changes here and you've recommended, then we'll just take it to MPO at whatever point that, you know, you've finalized it with FTA. So
Okay.
does that sound like a good approach for everybody? We'll just, does anybody have any other questions on this memo? It's essentially just taking the data that NTS had provided to us and developing rates, and those would be the targets. And I think you would need to stick with the 2019 data, because obviously 2020 is going to be very bizarre with all the COVID reductions in service. So, I mean, I don't really see anything changing, but if they wanted categories added, then we'll certainly do that. But would not hurt now to just, you know, give a thumbs up to what's been done so far. Any other opinions on that? Otherwise, I'd entertain a motion that we preliminary adopt these targets, subject to final determination by FTA whether these are the full categories that they want us to look at.
I think, yeah.
Motion, okay, second?
Second.
Okay, so I'll run through the by community vote, yes or no. Amherst,
Yes.
Hollis,
Yes.
Merrimack,
Yes.
Nashua,
Yes.
Pelham. Pelham may be muted. Pelham,
No, it looks like we lost him.
we lost him. Ah, well, Jen should be still here, right? Did we lose Jen? Okay,
I don't think she's here either.
this is just advisory anyway. DES
Yes.
and NRPC is yes, so that's fine actually. Well, it's not quite a quorum, but again, this is just advisory and we'll revisit it as necessary. Okay, so moving on to the next item is just a quick update on our 10-year plan project submissions for 2023 to 2032. We went through our 6 projects last time, and we were left with a balance of about 1.9 million that we've been trying to spend. So let me share an update on that. If I can find it.
Greg, Mark from Lineborough is joining.
Great. Okay, can everybody see that? Because I can't tell if it's up or not.
Yes.
Okay, so we gave it some thought. internally. I guess, first of all, we talked with the city of Nashua about potential Dozer Road off-ramp from the turnpike. That would fit within the remaining balance. And the city said, it's fine to go ahead with that, seeking 100% federal funding because the time is short to try to come up with 20% local match. So we did communicate with NHDOT on that. And I think they had a quite reasonable response that it would be very preliminary to actually put the project into the 10-year plan without, study being done beforehand, because it's a new facility. It's pretty significant change. They did say that if we wanted to add a study to the 10-year plan, they would certainly go along with that, but they would require a 20% local match by Nashua to do that. So, it seemed that we need to come up with something different, and we thought about it. And what we're proposing is a regional state highway traffic signal improvement project. This, I've discussed it with DOT. They seem to be on board with the concept. We're not identifying specific corridors where it would occur, but we would undertake studies on highways, state highways that are not within urban compact areas. And that would be required because if we're seeking 100% federal funding through toll credits, then it would need to be outside of urban compact areas. So what we would be looking at essentially would be signal coordination, possibly adaptive signal control, and installation of flashing yellow signals. And as you recall, that was a CMAQ project initiative by the New Hampshire DOT in the last round. And I think that is something that can improve traffic operations in a number of areas. I just happened to sit at one of these signals this morning coming in off the Broad Street Parkway, and there's no surrounding traffic at all. And I'm sitting there for about a minute waiting to take a left turn. So not that would be an eligible area, because nothing within the urban compact could be looked at as we've structured this. It would be 10 years away. So I think there would be plenty of time that if the communities did want to participate with match, then it could certainly be expanded to within urban compact areas. So I've set up the table that this regional project would utilize the remaining federal money, which we're estimating now $1,927,000, but that's likely to change that following DOT review of all of our other projects. But the intent is that this would fill out the balance of our program. So any discussion, comments on that? Anybody agree that would be a good project?
Greg, do you have any sense of how many signals are eligible for this project? I'm just curious. I know there are some communities that don't have traffic signals, and then, or very few, and then there are others like ours that are pretty much all urban compact. So I'm just curious how many communities, kind of the scale of the benefit to the communities.
I don't know the number of signals. I've looked at the map with the urban compact area, and it really does reduce, the scope of where we can implement this. And that's why originally I was looking at strictly a flashing signal project, but I don't think we have enough signals to do that. But I think if we're looking at overall signal coordination, we could do a good portion of 101A certainly. And that was a CMAQ project 20 some years ago, and I think it was quite effective. So, the thing is, we have quite a bit of time to, focus on, what the project would accomplish. And as I said, if we could raise some local match, we could be looking within urban compact areas for any community that wants to participate. But I think the important thing now is to get a project in here and not lose $1.9 million, because it will be spent in other areas.
Sorry, quick follow-up question,
Sure.
boys. I know, I don't really know how the urban compacts get set, and I should, so I'm kind of embarrassed to even be asking that, but how often do those get reevaluated and reassessed? I mean, obviously the urbanized areas based on the census change, and I'm just wondering how those compact areas get defined and assessed and updated.
I was under the impression it will happen after the census data is available, but I'd have to check with DOT or ask around to get more specific information. I mean, I don't think they would be changing a whole lot.
I don't remember them changing in the last census.
I don't either. And I know that I sent I know NRPC was involved with the urbanized area delineation, the smoothing of the boundaries, the whatever the federal versus the state ones, but I didn't remember them changing either. And I just was suddenly curious about that, but.
Julie, this is Sarah. I am actually digging an email out from Tim Roche back in 2017 about the definition of urban compact. So I can send it to you. I'm not going to try to paraphrase it because I don't want to do it incorrectly on the fly. But it has something to do with the opinion of the commissioner as well. So
Yeah. I mean, I know that's all at the state level, or that's my
Yeah.
understanding. And it's just, I don't know, it's more of a curiosity. I can do the research. Sorry for taking time.
Okay, any other comments on our 10-year plan project submissions? Well, everything has been submitted to DOT, so we will be meeting with them at some point to discuss the projects and the costs, and it moves on from there through the process. So moving on to our next item, we have the City of Nashua Bicycle Pedestrian Study, and Ryan is going to be giving us a presentation.
Okay, thank you. All right, so, well, first of all, this is the, I think the third time I've run through this. I think there's a few people on the call that have seen this in one form or another. So for those of you, I apologize, but for the most of you, ignore all that because this is really cool and this will be brand new to you. So congratulations. So this is a project we've been undertaking with the City of Nashua for the last year to look at their bike and pet network, both in the current conditions and analyzing future needs and improvements. Just to run through the summary of how we got here. It was about a one-year project. So we began in the fall of 2019 with a kickoff meeting with some identified project team members like you see below. So from our staff, it was Sarah and I, mostly on the GIS side, and then some representatives from the city, from various departments, from community development and public works, and the traffic department. Their GIS department was helpful in helping us with some data asks. And then MTS was also helpful in getting the word out for some surveys that we did and providing us with some other information. We identified 4 kind of top level tasks that guided us through the project. One was kind of a current conditions level of service data analysis of bike and ped facilities around the city. That led into a collection of some sample field data in targeted areas of the city. Then we went into a public outreach phase where we did some internet surveys and a webinar. The webinar was mostly presented in the form that you're seeing today, just a little bit of differences, but what you're seeing now was basically the webinar. And then the final deliverables were and are a report out and various posters and ways of presenting the data to city leaders and the public. So for this current conditions piece, we started with a kind of a traditional SWOT analysis, so strengths and weaknesses, opportunities and threats, where we identified certain things about the city and the bike and ped network that fall within each of those categories. So for example, a couple of the strengths we identified is that we do have a pretty extensive existing network of trails and sidewalks, a fairly motivated and involved group of people, both in the public and at the city leadership level, with a interest in, being progressive and friendly towards bike and ped related planning efforts, and a recent increasing investment in infrastructure to support those initiatives. A couple of the weaknesses we identified were, although we do have an extensive network, the trails especially tend to be located in pockets around the city, corners of the city that, and there's no, connective thread along the streets or other off-road facilities to help get you between those areas of bike and ped use. There's no current master bike and ped plan or other guiding policies to help the city go from planning efforts into implementation. And some of the sidewalk infrastructure, especially, and the ways that we've provided space in the city for bikes represents kind of the outdated way of doing things, both, crumbling infrastructure-wise and policy-wise. If you were to build something out new today, it would look a lot different than what the city has now. So some opportunities that we identified is that the city is embarking on a master plan update, and this process could certainly and will guide, a bike and ped / transportation chapter and efforts in the master plan. There are some key developments around the city that represent some opportunities to make sure that bike and ped friendly initiatives are included as part of those developments. And we have these long range rail beds sitting out there, possibly transitioning from rail to something else. And so for those people that are out there looking for long recreation loops or major, using rail trails as major transportation corridors, this seems like the best time in years that we've had to pursue that. Threats to this process obviously include weather, not the most bike and ped friendly climate we live in, both in terms of actually getting out there and doing the activity, but in terms of maintaining and paying for things to stay in good condition. Budget's always a concern with everything, obviously, but to the degree that bike and ped projects have kind of been a lower on the priority list in the past, we want to make sure that does not automatically get worse because of things like COVID-19 that are taking precedence and moving money away from certain initiatives. And obviously, although Nashua is mostly built out, like I said, there are still developments coming in, redevelopments, developments in surrounding towns that can only cause increases in vehicular traffic. And so, whereas we heard, and you'll see later, that one of the roadblocks for people that want to get out there and walk and bike more is the interplay between non-motorized and vehicular traffic. So the more cars we get, the harder it becomes to deal with these things for bike and ped users. So to analyze current conditions, we kind of split it up into a quantitative analysis and a more qualitative analysis where we asked people what they thought about the conditions on the ground. So we'll start with a quantitative analysis where we did kind of a data-driven approach to figure out what's out there now and where are the areas that the city should be starting to look at to get the biggest bang for their buck with improvements. So for this hotspot analysis, we collected a bunch of data both on the demographic side and the infrastructure side, and started to score them in certain ways and overlay where high scores of each of those attributes coincided. And this map shows the results of that. So up in the corner, you see some of the layers that were involved in this analysis. So on the demographic side, we used some census data like where kids live, so percentage of population that was under 18, and the data point for all these was census blocks, so they're very small areas. Percentage of that block where respondents of the census said they had 0 vehicles available, so obviously dependent on non-motorized or personal transportation modes. And people that self-report already as bike and walk commuters. So where are the people that are already telling us that they need good bike and pedestrian facilities to get to work and to perform daily functions of their life. On kind of the current infrastructure condition side, we looked at route quality. So to measure that on the walking side, we just looked at the percent of possible mileage of each census block roads that were covered by sidewalks on either side. And for bicycles, we looked at where are the low stress, what percentage of the roads in each block were low stress. And we'll talk a little bit about what that means later. But for those of you who remember the LTS initiative that we've talked about a bunch, it's the first 2 levels of low stress roads, so 1 and 2 versus 3 and 4. And then we wanted to get at kind of where would people tend to use it the most, a bike and ped network. So we included a destination analysis. So this data kind of came to us from the statewide LTS project, where they gathered statewide destination data on places where people are likely to bike and walk. So this would include employers, parks, schools, things like that. And so similar areas of population and all that might be scored higher if there are more bikeable or walkable destinations within a reasonable distance. So all those are scored, like I said, and combined into this heat map level. And what you see is, obviously downtown Nashua jumps out as that big red blotch in the Tree Streets area leading up into Concord Street in the north end. And then a couple of kind of sub areas that we identified out along Kinsley and Lake Street towards exit 5, out in the Fairgrounds neighborhood, and way out just before you get to exit 5, actually. So we use this analysis for a few things. And one important one was to drive where we would collect some pilot level data for the sidewalks. So the New Hampshire SAIDS project, which also covers things like the culvert analysis and the RSMS, roadway condition analysis. T-Squared has developed modules for collecting data on pedestrian infrastructure conditions. And they divide it into 4 modules. So sidewalks themselves and the curb ramps that lead you from sidewalks down to crossings, the crosswalks, and pedestrian and bicycle signals and the buttons that are on at each crosswalk and crossing. So we used that heat map to identify where we could collect about 20 miles worth, or between 10 and 20 miles worth of sidewalk and curb cut and all that stuff data, using the iPads and feeding into that SAIDS system. And we look at, some of it is qualitatively looking at conditions. So they give guidance on if it looks like, if it's got this much cracking, or other types of things, it's good versus fair versus poor. And then others are actual measurements, like how high is this curb? How wide is the sidewalk? What's the minimum width, counting obstructions? So a lot of it also leads into ADA type, being able to answer questions relating to ADA compliance. So a couple products that we've provided for Nashua already, and examples of things that you can do with this data, using just one attribute that you collect or a combination of attributes. You can do kind of basic condition maps like this, where we looked at what's the reported condition of sidewalks and curb ramps in the area. So here, anything green is good, yellow is fair, and red is poor. The lines are the sidewalks themselves, and all the points are those curb ramps at each intersection. And so you can kind of at a glance identify where some problem areas might be in terms of just upkeep and maintenance in condition alone. Similar story for crosswalks. So this is a little hard to see, but if you see something black, that means no noted deficiencies. Those are likely okay, but anything else is either, like we identified faded paint or lack of lighting at the crosswalk, or a combination of both. So again, you can get a sense if there's any geographical patterns where you might want to attack certain areas, add them to a schedule of maintenance or things like that. So very helpful to the city. So we recognize that quantitative data only tells one half of the story. There's all sorts of other areas of the city, obviously, that didn't show up in our heat map that people would have an opinion about. So we wanted to collect as much public input data as we could from surveys and from feedback from the general public. So we did that in 2 ways as part of this project. The first was an online survey that we administered through our publicinput.com account platform. We opened that in March before the end of times, and opened it back up again kind of after a slow start. But when things started slowly reopening after COVID started to hit, We got another huge bump of respondents after that. So we ended up with about 300 participants over the spring and summer, which was really solid for this kind of project. We then, like I said before, presented this particular presentation about the project, along with asking some further, more targeted survey questions at a webinar that we presented on the 1st of September that had about 30 participants at any given point. I'll go over some of the responses to that survey later, but I want to start with the initial online survey. So just running through some responses of that. We had 92% of the people say that they were residents of Nashua, and about half said they worked in Nashua. Looking at the question of how often they partake in each of these activities in the city of Nashua itself. So looking at the last two columns for bike, it's a little under 50% that bike at least once a week or almost every day. And about 3/4 do the same, but for walking. So lots of activity among the people that obviously chose to participate in the survey. Reasons for why people like or choose to bike or walk instead of using a car to get where they need to go. Almost everyone that responded to the survey said it because it's good for their health. Other strong reasons, including that they recognize that it's environmentally friendly, it saves money in certain cases because of traffic and congestion, it can be quicker, and it avoids parking headaches. Almost 10% of people said that they didn't have a car. So that kind of overlaps a little with that zero vehicle household statistic that we saw before. The main reason, or kind of destination-based reason that people choose to walk or bike, most people said they just do it for recreation or exercise. Not a lot of people reported as bike and walk commuters, 7% bike and 4% walk. And around 15 or 20% said they occasionally or often use bike and ped facilities to get somewhere as a destination. So, groceries, a store, church, things like that. Something other than recreation or just getting out to take a walk. So a few specific questions about their feelings towards current conditions in Nashua. This was an open-ended slider that someone could kind of push up and down based on how well they felt the city currently promotes and accommodates each of these modes of travel. So you can see bike travel was maybe around a 3 out of 10, below average on the slider, and pedestrian travel probably about a 4 out of 10. So some work to do there according to our respondents. Trying to get an idea of, again, how and why people choose to bike and walk. We asked how long they would be willing to typically use bike or walk to get to a destination. And between 30 and 40% on the end there said they would willing to walk at least half an hour or bike at least half an hour to get to their destination. So some encouraging things there when it comes to planning for some of these longer range facilities or corridor wide facilities, that the demand is there for these longer trips. This was a ranking question where we provided some options and asked people to let us know how important each of these things were when they considered taking a walk in Nashua. And so the lower the number would be a higher rank. So if the red bar at the top, presence of sidewalks, ranked somewhere between a 1 or a 2 on average for everybody. So that was the top choice. So they would much prefer to see a sidewalk there. That kind of guides their choice of whether they walk somewhere or not. And you can see the other choices down to crosswalks being the lowest choice, but that obviously depends on where in the city you like to walk. Same question for biking. These top 4 answers were kind of grouped a lot more closely together than the previous question. So whether there's a bike lane or not, and how much vehicle traffic there is, how fast the cars are going, and then just the general sense of safety of the area. We're all between a 2 and a 3 when people, when we aggregated all their ranks. So those are relatively close. We asked specifically about anyone that participated in Nashua's Veo Ride program from the past couple summers and falls. 16% said that they biked, and 10% said that they used the scooters. We had a map-based question where someone could click on the map and draw either a point or a line. And the prompt here was, show us areas of the city that you find challenging to get around. So taking a look first here at just the city in general, I've color coded them by whether they were comments specifically related to biking or walking or both general bike and ped related comments. Zooming into a couple areas of the city that we thought were interesting. This is 101A from roughly Broad Street out to Target. So, you know, again, some of these were specific location-based comments, like the one, the green one here at Somerset Parkway, where someone said that there's no crossing button on the corner. So something specific that the city could look at. But a lot of them were just in general about the corridor itself being terrible for biking and walking. You know, Route 101A in a certain stretch has spotty sidewalks. The whole street needs bike lanes and sidewalks from downtown all the way up to the end of the city. We had a couple of people comment that, you know, the rail trail running parallel to 101A would be a perfect spot for a separated use rail trail, railwood trail type path. So those are the kind of comments we got. Same story kind of on Main Street, where we've got location-based comments like this, no crosswalks here. You know, cars go too fast at this intersection, making it hard to cross the street or to bike along the street. And then more general comments. A couple of these down here relate to the need for signage and more information about the fact that, you know, there's the Heritage Rail Trail here, but the Mine Falls Park trails and all that has to offer is just a couple intersections away, and maybe some wayfinding signs that help open up that part of the city to people that might not even know it's there. And we'll talk a little bit about future projects that could come up later, and that plays heavily into that. A specific question about the interplay between city bus and bikes. The NTS is very bike friendly with their bike racks, and obviously most everyone needs to walk at some point to get to a bus stop. So, you know, sidewalks in and around major bus stops is a big deal. So 30% of our survey respondents said that they ride the bus occasionally. And the blue shapes on the map at the right are places where they said that they often board the bus. So it might be worth, you know, if we really targeted on this question and did more outreach to people that walk or bike to the bus stop all the time, this is a good way to find out, you know, are there problem areas that overlap where it's getting heavy use in terms of bus stops. Here's just a sampling of some open-ended comments that people provided at the end of the survey. So, you know, infrastructure type comments like when repaving, please make sure there's a decent shoulder for biking. That comment on the lower left speaks to the kind of the connection between trails issue that I mentioned earlier. And then just, you know, actually we got some positive comments here. So, you know, love the rail trails, wish there was more rail trails. Let's see a road diet. That would be amazing on Main Street. So lots of mixed opinions on that. So that was the online survey. I mentioned the second part of that was the live webinar that we did. And so that was mostly me doing this presentation to people, but we also did some live interactive poll questions. Some of them were very similar to the ones you just saw, but some of them were a little more specific and targeted. They also had the opportunity to chat and ask Q&As to us during the presentation. And we had a couple people answering them either back at them through the chat or live. We took a couple questions and answered them out loud during the webinar. One of the things we also added in addition to speaking specifically about this project during that webinar, was just talking in general about some of the current projects and initiatives that relate to bike ped that are going on right now in the city, just because we had a captive audience and people that might not realize some of the things that are happening around them right now. So you can get a sampling of them here on the screen, and a couple more here. So there's, like I said, if you don't realize what's going on, you know, bike and ped has taken quite more of an initiative in recent years. So there's projects happening that are making it better for users around the city. We also talked about what NRPC has done in the past centered around bike and ped issues and efforts on the planning side. So we've had the Plan for Health project from 5 years ago that was Nashua centric and was really tied to complete streets and looking at a guide to local officials for what complete streets are, how you can implement them in your community. And that is where we also first were introduced to this LTS concept that I will still be talking about a little later. We also, thanks to Matt, have done quite a bit with Safe Routes to School over the years in Nashua. at these 5 schools listed here, and Charlotte Ave is also happening right now. So that's doing a plan, a work plan and implementation projects to slow traffic, increase education and awareness, bike participation, bike swap programs, things like that at elementary schools around the region and in Nashua. We are either leading or participating in several bike and ped related committees around the region and at the state level. And we have several data collection efforts that are helping us keep track of what's going on the ground, including our bike and ped counters that are starting to increase out in the field. We subscribe with the DOT to getting data from the Strava app, which shows us some heat maps of use and patterns of bike and ped activity around the region and the world, and a facility inventory, so we know where the sidewalks are and the bike lanes and things like that, the trails. All that helps us, feed into the planning process. Just want to run through a couple examples of what I just talked about. This was a page out of that Complete Streets guidebook that we produced as part of that Nashua Plan for Health project in 2015. So part of that was a kind of a menu of various treatments and options that you can consider as part of a Complete Streets initiative, and the relative costs to build and maintain them, what they could possibly look like from other examples in other towns, and a description of what they are. So a lot of glossary and terms to help people get familiar with what some of the solutions can be to some of our problems. Okay, so LTS. For those of you who have not heard of this before or need a refresher, this is a concept of how to quantify bicyclists' level of comfort in relation to the traffic that's around them when they're out on the streets. So every segment of road in our region now has a LTS score from 1 to 4. It's developed from Europe and then came to us from traffic engineers at Northeastern University. And it's become quite a widely known and respected and used way of quantifying the condition of your roads for bicyclists in your city. So it's calculated by various attributes of the roads, such as whether or not you have a bike lane or not. If you do, how wide is it? And if you don't, is there a shoulder and how wide is that? Is there on-street parking and is it in the right place to either help or hinder people on bikes? How many lanes of traffic there are and how much traffic is there and how fast is it going? It does not include some more subjective measures like how hilly it is or what the pavement is like for riders. So you add all those up and kind of walk through a step-by-step matrix of those attributes and you get a score of 1 to 4. Those scores correspond to buckets or categories of riders where low stress LTS 1 roads are appropriate for everyone from kids on up. If it's an LTS 2, we still consider that on the low stress half, but we're kind of taking kids out of the equation at that point and saying that that's probably appropriate for your casual adult riders and up. And then once you get into 3 and 4, we're categorizing those generally as high stress and specifically as only appropriate for those that have extreme comfort on a bike. We've been calling them weekend warriors or fast and fearless, those kind of things that they don't care how much they would prefer to not be around fast cars, but they do it all the time and it doesn't bother them as much as it would an inexperienced adult or a child, obviously. Products that have come out of this include many maps and models that we've been using across the region and at the state level, and now starting to use it at the community and corridor-based level. We can run scenarios where we can look at what happens if you make improvements to certain stretches of roads, and I'll show that in a second. What does that do to your overall connectivity across your city's network? Here's the categories, like I mentioned. So we've come up with these acronyms or these categories. So kids and beginners all the way to exposure experienced. So we'd like people like you to get familiar with these terms because, like I said, this LTS is starting to become heavily used across the state thanks to several efforts. So you're going to be seeing this anywhere where there's alternative mode transportation planning going on. So here's an example of that scenario planning that I talked about. I think I did a version of this at another TTAC meeting a while ago, but this is slightly improved. So picture a scenario where the green star is Royal Crest Apartments down in the south of Nashua, out behind the Shaws and all that stuff. And everything in every road that's highlighted in thick gray right now is somewhere that you could bike to within 2 miles on the road network. So it's basically, this whole L-shaped area here. If we look at only the portion of the network that you could get to on low stress roads, according to that LTS score, so that would be a 1 or a 2. So consider a child that lives there or an adult that just kind of wants to get out for a leisurely ride. They can only get as far as the purple streets, which in other words is not out of their own development basically. So once they hit Spitbrook on the south or GW Highway on the east, you have hit a LTS 3 or 4 road, it looks like. And so you can go no further. Obviously that's not what happens in real life, but kind of from a planning and scenario-based perspective, it's instructive to see that, if someone was trying not to get in over their heads as part of their comfort level, this is about as far as they can go. So it's not very encouraging. If we were to take these roads that I just highlighted in yellow, so obviously not entire stretches, it doesn't cover the whole network, but just these stretches of Daniel Webster Highway and Spitbrook Road from the intersection out to the turnpike. Let's say we looked at the data and we figured out why they were showing up as LTS 3 or 4, traffic volume, obviously, no shoulder, lack of bike lane, obviously, things like that. And we imagined some complete street style improvements that would bring that score down into the low stress level to a 1 or a 2. By doing that and rerunning the network model and seeing how far that person on a bike can now get, we've now opened it up to this entire green network. So even though we didn't make improvements further down the road, we've made the connection such that once you get past these problem areas, you've opened it up to getting back to 1 or a 2. So again, in the real world example, think of a child that lives here and goes to school up in Sunset Heights up here. That kid can now, with the right facilities, safely get up there. There's schools and shops and parks out here on Spitbrook. So similarly, someone out there that wants to take advantage of the recreational or service-based options that are out in this part of the city could now, just by fixing this little stretch down here, use the rest of Spitbrook Road comfortably once the shoulder gets wider and the traffic gets a little better. So that's the kind of example. We can run these all over the city and look at where are the gaps and weak points that are low-hanging fruit in terms of if we just fix this one crossing or this one small segment, look at the neighborhoods we can connect. Also at this webinar, we showed people examples of some potential projects and pop-up installations that the city could look at to promote safe bike and ped travel. These are things that have been happening all over the state before us. There are groups that go around and help you set these up. So one of them is like I said, a pop-up installation. This is kind of a demonstration event where you can turn a street into something more friendly for bicyclists and pedestrians. The example on the left, they set up temporary bollards and restriped the road to provide a dedicated bike lane with a little buffer there along Marlborough Street in Keene, and also made the sidewalk and the environment itself a little prettier, made people slow down. And the idea here is just to get people to realize what a complete street looks like and know that narrowing vehicle lanes by a couple feet isn't the end of the world. Slowing people down doesn't hurt, and look at all the benefits that new users get out of it. So that's kind of an all-encompassing example on the left for bikes and pedestrians. The one on the right was a little more pedestrian focused. This is Middlebury. You can tell by the picture of the shoulder there that it's heavily walked upon. All the grass is worn away there. But that stripe and curb there usually doesn't exist. So they've set that up just to give people an example of what it would look like if we gave people a protected walk and or bike lane to provide some safer travel along that major road up in Middlebury, Vermont. This is another look at the Keene project from across the street from what you just saw. So you can see on the left, parking, wide open vehicular travel lanes with much more room than they needed. No crosswalk there at that driveway, no striping to speak of. And then on the right, you see what they did after the fact for that weekend with all the temporary striping. A lot different environment, but the cars doesn't really impact the cars, but it makes you pay more attention, obviously, and gives bicyclists and pedestrians a lot more safe space to move around and get where they need to go. Another example of kind of a creative way to to promote and install safe travel measures is this idea of creative crosswalks. This also came to us for the first time in that Nashua Complete Streets Plan for Health project from 2015. This is, pretty self-explanatory, but crosswalk treatments that not only raise visibility, but kind of give people a sense of place and belonging, that walking and biking is encouraged at that particular location. And you can do it in creative ways. The Rochester example on the left is near a school of music. So they've chose to make the crosswalks into piano keys. And the one on the right is the one that we used as an example for that Nashua project. We saw Haverhill does it all over the place, and they have kind of a restaurant row district where they got, I believe, some contributions from some of the businesses in the neighborhood and got together and painted some restaurant related crosswalks into the area. We did do this for Nashua based on this back 5 years ago. Couldn't really find a major street that the city was willing to undertake at the time. So we did the entrance off of Sargent Ave into Holman Stadium. So if you went to a baseball game at any point in the last few years, you might have seen the baseballs and baseball bats crosswalks that are out there. And we're hoping that the idea could catch on and spread to other areas of the city and the region. I mentioned people called out the need for better information and signage. So this is some examples of what some cities and towns could do on that end. Existing examples there on the left of wayfinding packages in Boston and Tampa, telling you things that are around you and how long it takes to either walk or bike there, and just really driving home the point that there are so many things to see and do around certain neighborhoods, and you don't need a car to get there. The example on the right is a temporary installation of this kind of thing that Nashua did set up with the Visualize Nashua team a couple of years ago, with QR codes that people could scan to bring them to more information and more maps about bike and ped opportunities in the neighborhoods. We looked at the concept of slow streets, which is kind of a more holistic approach. So instead of finding one particular street like Marlborough Street in Keene, you're looking at entire neighborhoods and either closing them off entirely to traffic, or making certain streets one way, or slowing, entire neighborhoods down to 20 or 25 miles an hour, and really looking at a more widespread neighborhood-based approach to solving some of these issues to make bicyclists and pedestrians feel safer as they share the road. This is an example of what Boston is doing. They take applications from various neighborhoods around the city and award projects to those neighborhoods. So here's a map of what they've done for slow streets in the Dorchester area. You can see they've added speed humps and parking restrictions and some curb extensions and things like that. So really driving home the idea here of a more widespread neighborhood-based solution to problems. So here's finally the part of the webinar. We, again, like I said, asked some new poll questions to the attendees. These were answered in real time using the Zoom webinar functionality. A lot of them were similar, so I won't go through some of the results that were kind of asking the same thing as the online survey from before, but these are some interesting new questions we asked. So we gave them a bunch of choices as to what they thought the 3 best things about a well-designed, when you have a well-designed bike and ped network in your city, what are the best things that happen in that city? And they were able to pick their top 3 choices, and here's how many people picked each one. So again, health and exercise comes to the top of the list. Connectivity is second. And then third would be a sense of community identity, with other, less than 5 people saying some of the other answers there. This specifically ties back to that idea, the LTS question from before. So once we introduced that concept, we asked them, thinking about the 2, kind of splitting those LTS rider buckets in half, where you have the LTS 1 or 2 riders being labeled as the willing but wary in the blue, and the more experienced LTS 3 and 4 appropriate categories as the comfortably confident riders in the 3 and the 4 would be orange. So using that as the framework, we asked, would you prefer that Nashua, if you had to pick one, Nashua implemented projects that improved the experience on the ground for which of those 2 categories? And of the 2019 people that answered that question that night, 12 of them said they would prefer to see comfortably confident. Obviously, that speaks a little to who was there at the survey. Experienced riders probably want, you know, the facilities that they use, and like I said, long range and commuting type options improve, versus families and children might want to see things near schools, or you know, those small gaps that help connect neighborhoods would be the willing but wary category. But for that night, the comfortably confident type projects won out. Again, we showed them those types of innovative projects from before, and we asked them which one. So that here they were only able to pick one, which one was the most appealing to them. And 7 people, the majority, picked the idea of pop-up installation. So that would be like the Keene Complete Streets example. And then all the other 3 examples tied for second place. So 4 people each picked either the wayfinding informational signs, the creative crosswalks, and the slow streets. And certainly the city has shown interest in doing one or all of these things in the future at appropriate locations. Finally, we asked a big question, specifically where in the city should be looking at making improvements to bike and ped transportation. This was another one where we gave them all the option and asked them to pick their top 3. And like I said before, connectivity to trails was answered in the top 3 by nearly everybody, if not everybody. So we've got all these pockets of trails out there. People would really like to be able to make bigger loops and be able to connect the entire city with better facilities. Main Street, the specific corridor of Main Street, was second place, and then Amherst Street, or 101A, was third, followed by DW Highway and Spitbrook, as we were looking at with that LTS example from before, all the way down the list where, you know, one or nobody really picked the specific areas of Crown Hill, Tree Streets, French Hill, Concord Street, North End, which is interesting. This kind of highlights what I was talking about before, where the data-driven approach as to where people really need bike and walk facilities is telling us a different story than at least the people that have participated in the surveys and webinars that we put out. They're focused on maybe a different kind of issue. So back again to where we're at now in this specific project, final products and deliverables. So Sarah has been working on a summary report based on everything that you just saw, including that SWOT analysis, the analysis of the hotspot data, the results of the survey, and all of these, and then recommendations, which I'll show you in a second. That's kind of on the written report side. We have packaged up all the data related survey results and hotspot data analysis and given that to the city so that they can look at it and have it. And then we made a poster map, which I will jump out to. That kind of is an all-encompassing way of talking about what this project has done, leading into those specific site-based recommendations. So I'm going to share a different screen. Okay, so this is what the poster looks like from afar, with different kind of the components that should look familiar to you by now down the side, just to kind of give an overview of what this project has been doing. And then specifically talking about recommendations, we have divided it up into some categories here, and then given on the map a couple examples of where some of those categories could happen across the city. So green would be major bike ped infrastructure that would be corridor-based, rail trail-based, and be multi-use paths. So these are things that we've seen are important enough where you can't just slap, whoops. Nope, sorry. Yeah, you can't just slap some striping down or something like that. This is kind of a major corridor-based improvement. So those are the green things on the map. An example of that would be, we've identified, lots of people have been asking for a connection along West Hollis Street 111 to make that connection between Mine Falls Park and all the trails up there down to the trails of the southwest part of the city and the Nashua River Rail Trail. So that would be an example of that kind of recommendation and improvement. Orange, we've called out as intersection specific safety improvements that could include the creative crosswalks or better signalization for pedestrians and bicyclists. While I'm down here, I'll just use this as an example. So we've got this area down here near where Captain's Corner is now, but there's potentially a lot of redevelopment and new development happening down here, including a new middle school and some new residential and commercial development. So with, a couple existing schools in this area already, we think this is a great location maybe for creative crosswalks that could tell people that they are in the neighborhood where lots of kids could walk with a school-based design. Or if this, if something related to recreation or trails or wildlife. And also signals if this particular intersection starts getting used more heavily because of the new developments and the new schools that are going in out there. So that's the kind of development that, or improvement project that we'll be looking at there. This purple color here is filling in gaps. So this addresses the LTS example along Spitbrook Road as an example that we talked about before. So where can we make smaller improvements to existing on-street facilities and thus making better connections for safer travel for pedestrians and bicyclists along those corridors or those neighborhoods. The teal thing here is where we identified appropriate locations for the signage and information and wayfinding. I've already kind of talked about this area, so let's just go back here. This addresses that area of the survey where people said, you've got two great trail resources here in the Heritage Rail Trail and the kind of off-road trails at Mine Falls Park. Let's connect them somehow or show people where the connections are using some signage and directionality input. And then finally, we have called out some neighborhood-wide solutions that would kind of mimic the slow streets concept. So where could we do a more holistic approach? Well, one of the areas that we talked about was out here near the East Hollis Street and the bridge to Hudson. So obviously that's kind of already been identified as a real gateway area. So we're looking at treatments here that would let people know they've entered a certain neighborhood of Nashua in the city of Nashua itself. We've got the Crown Street Park and Ride, potential multimodal rail facility out there. We've got the new extension of the eastern half of the Nashua Heritage Rail Trail that will terminate near Crown Street. So we've got all of these developments and multimodal ways of moving around coming together there. Wouldn't it be nice if the entire neighborhood streets were set up to handle all that in a way that is appropriate for all those users? So that is what's going on the poster, and that is what's going on project-wide. And if anyone's got a question, they are welcome to, I don't know, Mason, if anyone's chatted a question that you want to read me, or if anyone wants to unmute themselves and ask away.
Nobody has submitted any questions in the chat as of right now, but if anybody wants to, they're more than welcome to.
I explained it perfectly.
Okay, well, that's really excellent information, and this will be rolled over into our regional bicycle pedestrian plan, which Matt is going to be working on through the remainder of the fiscal year. So thank you for that presentation. So our next item is the Metropolitan Transportation Plan Project Web Viewer. And this is something that we're trying to improve ways that people can easily obtain project information. Of course, our MTP is online as a document, and people are certainly welcome to wade through it, but there are more user-friendly ways. And so Ryan is going to run through that. He's been working on this project, and we've really come up with something excellent here.
Yeah, me again. So yeah, Greg explained it pretty well. We've gotten feedback, from towns and from staff and from review processes that, we're always looking for ways to explain how the 10-year and long-range planning process works. And we're always looking for ways to show people where our projects are in all those various related plans. And a story map was a great way to pull them all together into one app. So we took a look around at what some other MPOs around the country were doing, and we settled on a kind of certain style and methodology for doing this. And so we've got this kind of scrolling narrative-based story map that, like I said, on the left will explain what the function of our MPO is and talk about what each portion in each plan of the process does. And as you scroll past this introductory slide, we're going to get an interactive map of all the projects that are in the current version of each of these plans. And it is interactive because you can click on all these projects. First of all, I'll let you know that does not pop up automatically, but down here in the lower left of the map is a legend button where you can see what all these symbols and colors mean. We've sorted them into categories. You can zoom around on the map using the plus and minus in the other corner, and all these are clickable. So for instance, here's a safety project in Brookline. They're labeled with the project ID at the DOT level, so that can help us identify what all these are. And we get an informational pop-up with some information that we keep in-house and we've kind of exposed to the general public. So a summary of what the project is doing, where it is, both specifically on what road or over what river or whatever the case may be, and the community that it's in. Just reiterating that this is kind of a safety-based project. The total estimated cost at the time of the plan, the current estimated start of construction year, and then where available so far, we've taken some pictures just to kind of jazz it up a little bit of what it currently looks like. So that's happening all over the region here. You can, some of these are, point-based projects, some are line-based projects, but they all follow the same format in terms of information that we provide. And the goal here is to keep this updated. So when there's amendments to current plans that we need to update this information with, that will be easily done. This all ties back to our GIS data behind the scenes. So once we update, a construction year or a cost behind the scenes, just a couple of buttons will update it here for the public as well. And we'll be featuring this on our website, as kind of a flagship transportation tool and document, as well as in our GIS page too. So this is the 10-year plan. As you scroll down, we break it up into the TIP projects. Obviously, there's it's a subset here and some overlap, and some new things pop into place, but it's the same story where you can click on a bridge, for instance, and get some information about that project. Finally, we've got the MTP showing some of the longer range things. The symbology changes here. So instead of a category, we've decided to symbolize it by whether it's currently fiscally constrained or just an illustrative project in the plan. So a couple examples of those would be Broad Street reconstruction in Nashua and the northern bridge crossing of the Merrimack in Hudson. So that's where we are with some of those. So all this obviously is going to turn over when the new versions of these plans come along. Our current idea right now is to add another panel at the end here, where we might take some projects that have graduated out of the planning process and into implementation and highlight them on another slide, just to give people an example of what this planning process has led to in the past for some completed and under construction projects. So that's what we can look forward to next winter and spring as we, like I said, turn over the process. So that is that.
Thank you, Ryan. That's another very useful tool. And of course, it does create challenges for us to keep it up to date, being an online tool similar to you go online to look at a restaurant menu and then you show up at the restaurant and all the prices are 20% higher. But we will attempt to do that. Okay, moving on then with our updates. And before we go to the others, I just want to provide one more NRPC update, and that's to mention that we are beginning work on our next UPWP for FY 22-23. So it's a 2-year planning program, and what we would like to do is solicit any needed services, projects that our communities would like us to perform as soon as possible, or essentially have until the beginning of February to submit to the DOT. So, just to run through some of our services, we do corridor studies. In particular, we would like to revisit the US 3 / exit 12 study in Merrimack, which we kind of had to punt on this time around because the COVID resulted in traffic declines of about 40% for a while on the corridor. Looking at that data in September, it's down only 9%, a little bit of slip back in October. So we're confident that that is something that we could look at if we don't get another reduction in traffic volumes. But hopefully we all get vaccinated and things are basically back to normal. Road service management systems, SAIDS inventory, traffic counts on demand by communities. These are all things that we typically do. So if you have thoughts, just send them to us as you can, because the DOT does like us to be as specific as possible. We don't have to anticipate every project initiative that's going to be out there, but they certainly appreciate it when we can specify projects that we intend to work on over the 2-year period. So with that, I'll turn it over to any of our communities for municipal updates. Just speak out. Julie.
Hi. So I've mentioned before that we are working on our master plan update. Imagine Nashua is the name of that. We have a project website called imagine.nashuanh.gov. Hey, Greg, can I share my screen? Do you know?
Sure.
Would it be possible? You mind?
Yeah, go for it. You can, Julie.
Thanks, Mason. All right. So are you seeing the survey screen? Did I share the wrong one?
Yep.
Okay. So this is the Imagine Nashua website, and we're doing a survey, and it's kind of a different kind of survey. This ain't no Survey Monkey. So the way it works is that people have made statements, and people taking the survey can either agree, disagree, or pass on those different statements. And then you can also add your own statement. You can't comment, troll, or push any hate on anybody else's statements. You can only make your own new ones, but you can, like I say, make your opinions about each statement known. So like this one, I believe the environment's everyone's responsibility. People should get a tax cut. I'll agree with that. Then you get the next one. So there's over 100 of these right now. So that seems like a lot, but they go really quick and you don't actually have to answer all of them. But it just kind of gives us a sense of consensus on different topics that people have written statements about. And these are statements that are written by the community and stakeholders. These aren't statements written by, a survey the questions have been developed by a steering committee. These are actual statements from the community, by the community, vetted by the community. It's kind of cool. I won't get into the weeds on the science behind it. I want to, because you guys know I love data, but this is kind of how the process works. And it just kind of shows of all the questions, these are the questions and where there's consensus and where there isn't. So it just gives the consultants in the city working on the plan just a broader set of statements and topics covered by the community that we can use to help guide the development of the plan. Second, and I'll be done, I swear, in just a minute. I've got a captive audience and I've already done this presentation once today. So we are also doing a contest. So it's the Imagine Nashua contest. And what we're asking people to do is print or find one of these signs. And we're asking you, how do you imagine Nashua? We want you to write it down, take a picture, a selfie, or like a 10-second kind of TikTok type video, post it on your social media site, whether it's Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram with a hashtag Imagine Nashua. And we will be pulling all the videos and compiling kind of a montage to put on the project website so people, can again see what everybody else is imagining for Nashua. And you can also win a fabulous prize chosen at random. All right, I'm done. Thank you. Any questions?
So this is something that's intended to be available to anybody in the region, not just Nashua residents?
It's all stakeholders, if it is a Nashua centric, it's our master plan. So it is for Nashua. Right. We hope that people won't put comments in about, say, Manchester, if you come to Nashua, if you have an investment in Nashua, whether it's where you work, recreate or live, we want your input.
So do you obtain that kind of information, whether somebody works there or is a resident?
We don't. This is not that kind of survey. Yep. It is, like I said, it's just open. It's anonymous. People can sign up after I think you've entered 6 questions. You will get an opportunity to enter, add, an email address or your Facebook, tag it to your Facebook. You'll get sent emails or notices when new questions are asked or submitted so that you can continue adding your opinion.
Okay, very good. Any
All right.
other municipal updates? And so DOT did not attend today and DES has left us, so that leaves Federal Highway. Lee.
Yeah, hi, Greg. No, nothing really to update anybody on at this point in time, but just a nice job to you guys for doing the presentations you made on kind of visualizing project data for Bike Ped and from your long range plan, your 10-year plan, your tip. I really appreciate all the good work you guys are doing. So thank you.
Well, we appreciate your appreciation. Okay, so I'll mention that we're not intending to hold a December meeting, so wish you happy holidays and Thanksgiving. And I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Okay, and the second,
Second.
and unless there are any objections, I declare us adjourned. And we'll see you in the new year.
Thank you. Happy Thanksgiving. Thanks, Ryan and Sarah, for the great job on the Bike Ped plan.